Hi everyone. I hope you had a good holiday weekend. So Labor Day is always great, especially if you don't have to go into work. So hopefully you didn't have to go into work or it wasn't very long. Okay, well, we are studying culture this week and I wanted to just touch base with you and make a few points about culture. And I'm going to try not to get into too much detail because I kind of want to know maybe what it is that you're not understanding, so I don't want to kind of concentrate on things that maybe you're not having a problem with. So that's why I'm going to do my best to just do more of a overview, and then we'll see each other on Monday, and we are still studying culture on Monday, as well as, so Chapter 3 in the OpenStax book, Introduction to Bully Society, and then on Monday we're going to add Section 4.3 in Chapter 4. Okay, and that's about social interaction. So it all goes together. And that is going to be the session prior to your first exam. So your first exam is Monday, September 17th. So most definitely, if you have questions about the previous two chapters, chapters 1 and 2, or if there's something in regard to the reading on culture, on bully society, or on that social interaction piece in Chapter 4, then Monday is the time to ask. And you can ask it before then. You can send me an email, of course, so you have many ways of contacting me. Okay? So I'm going to kind of click over to, you have a slideshow, and I'm going to move this over a little bit. So you have a slideshow for culture, and generally when we're talking about culture, I think a short way of defining it is a way of life, and it's a shared way of life. So culture is shared. So we don't have we don't have individual cultures or individual language. For instance, language is a component of culture. These are things that are shared. So humans live in a group environment, and we define aspects, we create aspects of culture together in that group environment, and we practice them. We practice the norms of this group life that we've created, and by practicing it, we reinforce the culture so that it continues to exist from one generation to the next. So here, the definition is slightly longer than a way of life or a shared way of life. The definition here on the slide is shared beliefs, values, and practices that participants must learn. To start out with, we are going to, sorry about that interruption. To start out with, we are going to, see if I can find this here. I'm going to run through this culture slide presentation. And I'll turn that down a little bit. So there's some discussion of cultural universals. So these are traits that we all share. Some basic elements of culture, norms, values, beliefs, and symbols. What I usually concentrate on a great deal are norms, values, and belief. Symbols are important as well. We talked a little bit about symbols when we discussed symbolic interactionism. So that was that theory from Chapter 1 that comes from the micro level, focuses on individuals and how we communicate and how we develop these shared meanings, which can be verbal or nonverbal. So it can be spoken language, it can be the written word, it could be facial expressions, for instance, body language. So all of that is involved with symbols, and of course those symbols are culturally meaningful. They may not be cultural universals, in other words, so they may not have the same meaning wherever we were to travel in the world. So there can be some variation. So norms are the social rules for our behavior. Very, very important. And there are 3 different types of norms. And you may have read about folkways, which are more informal, they're casual. And then mores, which have some kind of ethical or moral significance. Ethical, I use to refer to references of treating others with dignity, knowing right from wrong, and of course that's defined within culture. And morals, when we're talking about moral standards, then often that gets into religion. So the moral standards of a religion can be different from ethics. So morally, for instance, it may be considered immoral to not wear, and I'm thinking of a particular occasion where I attended an event at a Baptist church and I wore pants. So maybe some people thought that was immoral. There was someone who was near me who stated very clearly that he thought that the women who attended the event should be wearing dresses or skirts, and I was not, so he apparently saw that as disrespectful. And the female that I was with was not wearing a dress or skirt, she was wearing pants as well, and he saw that as something that was disrespectful. So that, on some level, maybe for that particular individual, he saw that as morality, a moral issue. Having a child out of wedlock might be a moral issue, particularly when it comes to religion. But in secular society, outside of religion, it's not necessarily so. So there's growing acceptance, for instance, of people who have children outside of marriage. So that's kind of a little bit of the difference between ethics, morals. So back again to norms, we were distinguishing folkways, which are informal, mores, which have some moral significance or ethical significance. And then, of course, there are laws. So when norms are very important, we enact them as laws so that we can apply the full force of the state against individuals who violate those standards. So then there is a formal punishment or a formal sanction to violating that particular norm, which has been enacted as a law. Okay. So I am not going to describe all of these in detail because that would be probably a 1-hour lecture. But please take note if there are things that I'm glossing over that you would like more information on, you can tell me about that. So moving on to our next slide. What else is there to know about culture? Okay. So there are fish aquariums. There are aquariums. So one thing that I sometimes do when I'm starting out talking about culture, I put a picture of an aquarium on the board, on the whiteboard, and okay, that's not quite what I wanted. So, sorry about that. Okay, so let's just look at this aquarium right here, even though I'm kind of messing it up. Okay, so one thing that I've done with the class is to ask for volunteers to come up and just, looking at the screen to draw, and maybe mentally you can think about this as well as to what you would do, to draw. Imagine that you're taking a picture, of this aquarium, and draw a circle around where you would focus your picture. What would you capture within your picture? So, which, parts of the aquarium would you include? So the last time I did this, it was fun because there tends to be a great deal of emphasis on the colorful fish, on the fish, period, and on the colorful fish. And so there's a study that was done that said that found that, the authors found that people in individualistic cultures, such as the United States, where we're accustomed to individualizing people and thinking on an individual level and not thinking of ourselves as attached to something larger, kind of thinking that, we kind of make our own way and that's what's most important and that's what, we should be worried about. We shouldn't be worried about maybe groups, for example, the groups that can be affected by our actions. So that's very individualistic. So people in individualistic cultures, what they had a tendency to do was to draw, kind of pinpoint maybe a especially colorful fish or a couple of fish, and then draw their circle around those fish, and maybe ignore the ones that aren't very colorful, maybe the ones that aren't as large, the ones that don't stand out as much, and then maybe ignoring some of the ecosystem. So in the tank, there's a whole ecosystem that's going on. So there are plants and rocks and fish and water, and so there are many aspects of life under the sea that we may not think about in individualistic cultures. The study also found that people in group-oriented cultures, they tended to focus more broadly and they're more interested on the entire ecosystem. They were interested in the plants, they were interested in what might be living down in the plants or living attached to the rocks, etc. So they're not just focusing in on a few colorful fish. And American films kind of encourage us to focus on individuals. Programs about fish, for example, or life under the sea may focus on certain types of living things and ignore others. So when I ask in class, when I ask people to do that, for most students there is a tendency to do that, to focus in on a couple of the colorful fish and ignore maybe the smaller ones, ignore the ones that aren't so colorful, etc. That is a reflection of our culture. That comes from culture. It comes from what we have learned in our society. So that's what the aquarium refers to. So there are types of norms, as I mentioned, formal and informal. Laws was missing from there, so you should keep that in mind. Social controls, what we refer to as methods of encouraging conformity to social norms. And I apologize for this notation. I'll need to revise the slide. I created the slides and the notation wasn't there, and then the company added the notation because I didn't want to pay as much for the service. So they, kind of popped this, this advertisement in there. So I apologize for that. So I have to redo some of my slides. So methods of encouraging conformity. So go on and think for a couple of seconds as to what that might be. It could be a smile. It could be a dirty look. It could be look of confusion. So if we are saying or doing something and we get a confused look, we're going to reassess our behavior. We're going to assess, okay, what is it that I'm doing and why, what is it about what I'm doing that might have led to this look that I'm receiving? Why is this person giving me a dirty look? Did I say something that was offensive? So that is social control, because we might be more likely to think twice about that the next time the opportunity comes around. Maybe if we use profanity, in front of a parent or grandparent, if we get a dirty look from grandma, then we might think, oh, okay, maybe I shouldn't have said that. So that's an example of social control. So also a part of culture. Police are part of social control. They're agents of social control. Parents, teachers, agents of social control. Something else we see within society is ethnocentrism and cultural relativism. So these relate to our attitudes towards others. If we focus in on our own culture and we tend to view other cultures negatively, such as criticizing their clothing or their language, then that is an example of ethnocentrism. Ethnocentrism can lead to cultural imperialism, where we want to impose our own culture on others because we think it is superior. And cultural relativism is judging other cultures by their standards. If we think about, I won't say it, but I'd like for you to think about then what cultural relativism can lead to. So we've said ethnocentrism can lead to cultural imperialism, so what do you think cultural relativism can lead to? Okay. Other terms: subculture, counterculture. And I'd like for you to just think about what you see. What are your observations about culture? Do you tend to see culture as being something that is shared, in that it's a positive sharing? Or do you tend to see it as something that is imposed? Are there aspects of culture that you think maybe reflect one particular cultural perspective, for instance, or one culture's ethnic background, such as speaking English? So that would be an example. So there are different ways of looking at culture. Our clothing, the clothing that we wear, for instance, in the U.S. and anywhere else, portrays, reflects a certain cultural background. There was a little controversy a few months ago in South Africa, and there was a teacher whose student. South Africa is a fairly diverse place as far as culture. There are 11 official languages in the country, and there are so many, different groups that are there. Then have kind of, to some degree, they've kind of come together and they're able to share the society, but then there are also some distinctions that remain. So there was a teacher who decided that he would allow his female students, to do a traditional Xhosa dance performance. And hopefully I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's Xhoso. So Xhoso, Xhosa. And I visited South Africa several years ago, and that's what I recall is the pronunciation. So Xhosa. So then the dance performance involved the young women being topless, so not having any shirts on, and they had some kind of like apron type of clothing that was on at their waist, and so there were many people who saw this performance and were up in arms, and didn't think that it was appropriate at all. So there is the culture, the subculture of the Xhosa people in South Africa, and this teacher who thought that he was allowing those students to share their culture with others, but then there were other cultural perspectives that thought that the teacher was out of line. So there are particular standards about nudity, especially in Christian religions. Nudity tends to be frowned upon, and it's often equated with sex or sexual promiscuity, although it doesn't have to mean that, but within one culture, that is what nudity is associated with. So even the young women not having shirts on was viewed as something that was objectionable. So hopefully you got that example. And so the people who objected, we could say they're ethnocentric. We could say that they were biased in thinking that maybe they wanted some cultural imperialism. They thought that their culture, whatever their standards of right and wrong were, their values should be the ones that are imposed upon everybody. So that is ethnocentrism. That is can be even viewed as cultural imperialism. So that is a kind of overview of the culture slides. I'm also going to post another slide talking a little bit about the introduction to bully society. Please give me some feedback. Let me know if you want me to talk about anything else, and you can also ask questions on Monday when we meet in class. Okay, thanks for your attention.